To give us a little bit of background about enslavement and maybe why it is that we don't want to engage with it.
Maybe standing up would be better.
Okay.
As a teacher, I can see those at the far back. Hi. It's not part of the 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I think this evening we are dealing with a very deep topic, very emotional, and a topic which we cannot, of course, say everything about tonight. I've had the privilege of working on slavery since 1975 as a master's student and as a PhD. And of course, I looked at indigenous slavery in Ghana for a master's, went around field trip collecting oral history. One of my chapters, I actually collected proverbs on how slaves were treated within the domestic system. And then the indigenous has been there, then Atlantic comes in, and all forms of slavery. And I think it's important to recognize that slavery has happened from ancient times to modern times. In the most civilized society, as well as the most non-civilized. Because of the need for labor, the needs for, in the case of Africa, for women were more highly prized than the men because they were married into families, had children, and so on and so forth. But one of the things I would want us to emphasize is to look at the different aspects of it. All slavery is not the same. And indigenous is different in terms that, in the sense that slaves became part of the family, part of the household, because of the kinship structure of Africa. And I often tell my students that if I say he's my brother, and of course we were mates, we did history together in the early 70s, Nana. If I say he's my brother, it may not be biological, but there's a kinship system that allows you to call somebody your brother, your sister, and so on. And we need to understand Africa's social structure to know how slaves can become part of the kinship, to see how slaves can get political mobility because they are part of the family, and so on and so forth.
AC.
Yes, Madam.
It's always so difficult talking about Africa and the problem of definitions. When my sister here was talking, I was smiling in my head about even the definition of slavery. Do we have the right to use the word slavery with regard to what was happening in Africa itself? Or is it a shadow of slavery, something else, and so on and so forth? So it comes back to even the word ruler. And I sit here today and I keep on laughing, sadly, about Africans calling themselves by titles that don't even exist in their own language. I don't know how to translate His Majesty into Fanti. I have people who come to me and say, Your Highness. Then I wonder, I said, Your Lowness. And so on and so forth. So this is part of the problem that we've had because of the direction of our miseducation. And I don't want to say education. Mainly because of the way some of us have gone to school, we tend to see even our ruling systems in terms of the feudal terms. So you may see that people who occupy certain offices then tend to see themselves as kings and queens and so on as what was happening in England. And therefore, since it was a feudal system and the king does that, if you go into Ratri, for example, you might find out that the Asantehene or the Omahine of Kumasi was a very democratic institution. And so if you're getting into a better democracy than what was even the British had, then to say rulers, then what are you talking about? So these are part of the misconceptions that we need to address as we are going. What really happened to us? Was there a king who got up and says, go and catch this for me? No. We need to really look at our history from our own cultural definitions. And once we do that, probably all this thing about it was African chiefs. What chiefs? The British in the 19th century decided that nobody should be king, everybody should be a chief, so we all became chiefs. And today we walk around, I'm a chief. I'm simply Nana. And I know the meaning of the word Nana. And the meaning is so powerful that sometimes it frightens me sitting down and even talking like this. But I know that Africa is in a maelstrom at the moment. The whole continent is enslaved. Even those who are slave masters in the various, what do they say, lifestyle houses and all those kind of things. You know, they're just keepers. We need to understand, and in understanding what happened to us, we then understand why today we are, how did Bob Marley say, we are so mentally enslaved that we can't move forward. So I disagree with that thing that it was a ruler. It's a period that we need to look at it with our own cultural spectacles. And so far, we have not done so. And this kind of movie sort of challenges us. When I watched this, my mind went back to the early 70s. I had a very good friend, Crow Novell from Chicago. He came, we stood on the parapet. At that time, the Cape Coast Castle was much better than it is right now. It hadn't been refurbished. It had this eerie feeling and all this kind of thing. You go in there and you feel as if the ancestors are talking to you. And then we stood on the parapet. And for one reason or the other, Novell turned around and both of us hugged each other and we wept. We just cried.
I actually came with an agenda.
Okay.
So I'd like to maybe speak in 5 minutes to my agenda, since I have seen this movie. And what I want to share with the audience is that you're about to see dehumanization at its very worst. And you will experience the abject horror of slavery. It will be unnecessarily assaulting. And to know what African people went through, to be torn from their homeland, to be taken through unforgiving seas, terrain, and sinister hands of the same species. And they will ask you, what is the worth of a human being? And what I want to start by asking, I think this film is about truth. And I wanted to actually speak to truth a minute. And I wanted to know how many people know who Gordon Parks is. Okay. So a really important figure in the African diaspora, African-American, renowned photographer, director. This film was made before. It was made in 1984 by Gordon Parks. Avery Brooks was the actor. And it was a very powerful piece. It was called, Northrop's Odyssey. And so I encourage you, we keep talking about we should never forget. And in some ways I'm asking you, as you go through this film, to think about the ways in which your complacency, our complacency, equals being compliant in the system. So I challenge you in that today. When we show this to NYU students, I thought it was important that I bring up what one of the students said to me. She came and she was very emotional. And she said, I don't want this to be my legacy. You know, we're bigger than this. I don't want this to be my legacy. And I didn't have words for her. I just kind of really felt emotional around that. And I went home and I've been really thinking about that. And I want this to be my legacy. This is my legacy. And in this is pain, but in this is also strength. And I hope that you'll be able to see that today.
But I want to deal with the color thing as well. I think for a large part, you know, many of us of African ancestry think that the color problem is not a matter of all of us or African people proving that we can not look at color. I think we proved that throughout our legacy. I think white people need to get their program together of not dealing with color. And I don't say that to just, you know, stir up more controversy, but, you know, the whole fact of the matter is that African people by force have been having to deal with, you know, the whole reality of white people being in charge. Even we've accepted worshiping God in the image of a white man. And we have no problem with that because every car, taxi, anything else you ride in today, we have a picture, an image of a European, and we take that as the image of God. I think white people have to learn how to handle people other than white being empowered and also sharing, you know, what is going on in this world and people being able to master their own destiny without being instructed of how to do so and accepting them on an equal path. So in that healing process, sis, I appreciate it being put out on the floor for discussion, but I don't think that's a problem that we all equally share in terms of having a problem. I think that, again, the history of why we're dealing with all these situations here and are speaking is because, again, African people have proven throughout the 500 years of our engagement with each other that we can open up our arms, even share our resources and share ourselves. And in all of that process, still equated as not being equal. So we should qualify that statement and be more specific when we say it, where the problem really lies.
Look at this character, Patsy. And I'm saying tonight, here is a woman, I'm comparing it to, here is one slave who is so oblivious to the sex thing. She doesn't want any parts of this issue because it's being forced upon her. And here is someone who is now being taken out of probably a more privileged existence and been thrown into this because she's yellow. And if anybody's offended by the word yellow, I'm sorry, but that's just, it's just a term. It's not because I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Krista. No,
You're yellow too. We shut down in Ghana. In Ghana, you're yellow too.
Is it red? Okay, I'm sorry, red people. No, I'm kidding. She's this fair-skinned lady. And she's been obviously taken out of a life that's a privileged existence. And so for her, sex was not something that she shunned. So for her, she had this need. And she used him to get fulfillment. So I'm only describing this to say that there were so many different facets to these different women. The white slave woman didn't even know she was enslaved to this man who hated her and on so many levels, but loved her because she was representative of what she was supposed to be. I could go on and on and on about the pain that Patsy went through and her existence. But what I'm trying to say is that this has not stopped today.
Black people, Africans, African Americans, Brazilians, Black people all over the world are always wanting to be a part of something which they are not. You should first learn to be a part of what you are.
Thank you.
And be proud of that and be grateful for that. And that is what will make you a part, make someone else want you to be a part of them.
I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge it. And what is wonderful to me about this film is that finally that history, this particularly American story, is being heard. And maybe it's a segue into America, Americans, all of us, having an opportunity to make sense of who we are. Obviously, as an African American, it's a particular story. It's a story that we've been so estranged from in terms of our history. You know, I mean, I want to say, as you said, and I'm glad you took it up, is none of us had anything to do with yesterday, but all of us have everything to say about today tonight.